Welcome to our event today. We are very excited about hearing Dr. Parks speak on a very important topic. My name is Hoda Mahmoudi, and I'm the holder of the Baha'i Chair for World Peace at the University of Maryland. We are in the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences. I'd like to first and foremost thank Dr. Kate Seaman, who's the Assistant Director of the Baha'i Chair, for organizing today's event. And we have two BSOS ambassador students in the back table who helped also with the organization of this event. And also Ashley Taylor, undergraduate student who helps me with my honors seminar and other things. Today's talk is being given by Dr. Sherri Parks. She's a colleague, but first she's a friend. She is the former Associate Dean for Research, Interdisciplinary Scholarship and Programming at the College of Arts and Humanities at the University of Maryland. And she is Associate Professor of American Studies as well. She's the first director of the Arts and Humanities Center for Synergy at the University of Maryland. And she is really a public intellectual who has appeared frequently in national and international media. She is a long-time and an award-winning public radio host and commentator, and is now a regular critic, cultural critic for WYPR-NPR and the Baltimore Sun broadcasts program called Roughly Speaking. Her general research area is that of public aesthetics, the ways in which people find and create meaning and beauty in their everyday lives, with specific emphasis on race, gender, social class, and sexuality. She is also a very well-known Black academic feminist whose work has been identified as part of the Black feminist canon. She is the leader for one of the first National Endowment for the Humanities in the public square grants called Baltimore Stories, Narratives and the Life of an American City. She is one of the co-leaders of a $1.2 million grant awarded by the Mellon Foundation for synergies among digital humanities and African American history and culture, and co-leader of Home Stories, which is a new NEH grant in which UMD students collaborate with recently arrived immigrant youth and develop digital stories. Dr. Parks' most recent publication is Fierce Angels, Living with a Legacy from the Sacred Dark Feminine to the Strong Black Woman. Fierce Angels was an editor's pick by Essence magazine. In the book, now in its second edition, Parks traces the archetype of the nurturing and strong, sacred, dark feminine from early creation stories through religion, literature, and in the secular version of Strong Black Woman into popular culture. In all of her work, she strives to explain the deeper cultural histories that inform the expectations, attitudes, and relations that Americans have with each other, so that richer understandings will lead to more sophisticated and mutually rewarding interactions. The topic of her talk today is Fear of the Dark, Cultural Myth, Psychological Schema, and Prejudice. Please welcome to the podium Dr. Sherri Parks.
Let's see if this works. And so you can hear me. Too much? Okay? All right. A note first. When I use the term mythology, I don't mean it as fake story. It is a very good thing. So you'll hear me moving back and forth between religious traditions, and I honor them all. And we can certainly talk about that. First, let me start by thanking Dr. Mahmoudi for this opportunity. I'm excited about it, and you'll see that I've been bringing in some more recent things when we get to Saturday Night Live last weekend. So you helped me to think some more. I think many people in this room already know this, but just to set the stage as to why we're talking about this. We are all biased. Let's start there. But there's research that the majority of white people who take the implicit bias test do demonstrate biases against darker skinned people. The University of Virginia has amassed a database with 2.5 million people. The behavioral sciences in the room will recognize that it gets really reliable when you've got that many people. 68% of the participants demonstrated implicit bias toward black people, dark skin, and black children. I notice, I'm moving back and forth between black and dark. Darkness is something we'll talk a lot about. I'm considering black as the extreme of darkness, as the culture does, as this culture does. And a 2010 study that was a follow-up revealed the same thing. So it's stable over time and it's not changing. One of the things that I am suggesting is that our relationship with dark people, people that we have labeled black, as any 4-year-old girl picks up, as my daughter did, she says, there are no black people, there are no white people, they're pink and brown. Yes, and then she got hit to kindergarten and suddenly she was using black and white again. But the people we have labeled black has a lot to do with our conceptualization of blackness and darkness. Now, this is a very interesting moment right now because we're able to look at the brain in different ways and begin to think about things being hardwired. The brain, keep in mind that the brain is actually very plastic and elastic. We learn, we move. And as Dr. Mahmoudi suggested, I have an agenda. You're not supposed to give an academic talk and say, I have an agenda. My agenda here is to pull up things that are right in front of your face and show them to you and pull them apart so that you pull up things that seem automatic and natural into consciousness and decide for yourself if this is how you want to move through the world. So yes, I have an agenda. We have a relationship with the atmospheric darkness. We sleep at night. We all sleep at night. The fact that you're sitting here, a little of you are sleepy. I do recognize that this is nap time for undergraduates. I do recognize that. I have a 22-year-old of my own at home, now in college actually. So I recognize this is nap time, but most of you are supposed to sleep at night. And if you keep someone from being able to sleep, they begin to have mental illness problems. The same thing is if you give them too much light over time or you give them too much dark over time. So that circadian rhythm, which without artificial light has us awake during the day and asleep at night, is something that we all seem to have, that all mammals seem to have. But the darkness is also risky. We played around with the idea of whether we could shut out all the lights in here. It's called an atrium for a reason. We can't. I mean, there's natural light coming in. Then I thought maybe the administration of the union would not have liked me to have done that. The night is risky because it conceals things. And so at the same time, the night is protective. Now, go back to before the dawn of artificial light, way back. We were not, before the invention of weapons, we've been talking about weapons a lot in the last couple of weeks, we were not at the top of the food chain. There were beings that wanted to eat us and were successful in wanting to eat us. And we rely a lot on our ability to see. Now, the physical scientists in the room, and there are a few of you, know that for people who rely on what we can see as much as we do, and Westerners do more than other cultures, we don't see very well. We particularly don't see very well at night. And so the night is risky. And so we have this dual relationship of darkness as being as protective and of dangerous. I had an epiphany, my daughter that I just mentioned, and I will tell her another story about it, and all of those have vetted by her. She rides horses, and we were doing what's called foal watch, where you watch the mare while she's about to give birth, so in case something happens. And I'm sitting there watching. I told the kids to go to sleep, and I just set up because I can't sleep on a hay bale anyway. And And the mayor was looking at me. I was under a red light, so supposedly she couldn't see me, but she clearly could. She's glaring at me like, don't you have somewhere to go so I can have this baby? And most mammals, unlike humans, can control when they give birth. And I was working on Fierce Angels, and I was trying to figure out why so many creation stories start in the darkness. Because couldn't it be 50-50? You know, but they're not. Almost all of the creation stories start at night, and I was trying to figure this out, and I had an epiphany, and the next morning I asked the woman who ran the barn, who used to be a curator for the Baltimore Zoo, when are most mammals born? And she said, 85% of mammals are born at night. Most mammals, unlike baby humans, can walk after a while, right? And the night is protective. The predators are asleep, and it gives mom and baby time to get up on their feet. Because I had been worrying about this risky darkness bit, and then I thought, wait a minute, the darkness is both. It is risky and it is protective. Now, this is not necessarily, although I'm talking about it as natural, don't let me fall into that trap. Because darkness, as dangerous, as bad, as negative, while it is often the way we talk about it in Western culture, is not always the case. I'm going to show you a little video that kind of opens up your thinking about darkness and night and other cultures. Actually, she's going to show it.
According to many of the world's creation stories, the beginning of time was black, until a flash of light created the universe. Most human cultures dislike the color of darkness. In language, black things often refer to negative things. In film, the villains usually wear black. And in sport, teams in black strips get penalized more than those wearing other colors. Children begin fearing black animals from the age of 3, and some adults think they bring bad luck. Today, the blackest black is made from carbon nanotubes, absorbing 99.965% of light. It's almost as dark as a black hole. But black isn't as dark as we think. The word black originally meant shining white or flashing. The Chinese thought black ink encapsulated every color in nature, and the French artist Renoir called black the queen of all colors. Today, black is also the most fashionable color. In the UK, women buy an average of 17 black garments and accessories every year. So when something popular comes along, we like to call it the new black.
Okay, in mythology, origin stories are really important. Are there any comic book people here? Any gamers? There are, just one. Okay, just sit quietly and process, because some of you are smiling at me, process what I'm saying. Origin stories are really important. In the beginning, this is Judeo-Christian creation story. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The darkness was there before God did anything. Who made the darkness? Well, in the neighboring tribes of the ancient Hebrews, the Mesopotamians and later the ancient Greeks, the darkness is not depersonified. I spent the last few years when people were trying to figure out the Big Bang Theory and trying to figure out how the world evolved from nothingness. And usually I'm getting this at NPR and I'm yelling, because it's not nothing, it's everything. For the ancient, I start Fierce Angels by saying that the particle physicists and the ancient mythologies say the same thing. It was dark, something happened, and the world started. Except for the ancient mythologies, the darkness is either overtly female or an androgyny. And this is a quote, she is the mother of herself. I love that line. She is the mother of herself. And the world starts when she decides, and I'm not suggesting rational thought, that's overreach, but the world starts when she asexually gives birth to the heavens and the earth and keeps the underworld to herself, because that is the place of regeneration. She is Mother Earth. You're beginning to see that what I'm going to be doing over and over is pulling these ideas from the ancient world through to popular culture. And that is one of the first ones. I showed you the image of the creation. This is a black hole. There are people in the room who are scientists. Black holes, we think that the vast majority of the universe is dark. So what we have now is actually an aberration. Now, black holes are darkness with personality. You could argue that they're darkness with attitude, because dark holes are huge and they have both aspects, right? They generate, but they also do what? You're whispering. I'm a black woman. You can do call and response. What?
Consume.
Yes, they soothe, right? They can pull. And if you think about the writing about black holes, they are often perceived, and psychoanalysts picked up on this very quickly and started using black holes as an analogy for the overarching mother. But the idea that it is the beginning, it is primordial. Remember I said origin stories are really important. And any of you who do game know that if you're gaming, there's some games where you can play around with the primordial darkness, and if you control the primordial darkness, you control the rest of the universe. So that idea of the first darkness being there is very much a part of our culture. And that relationship of darkness being both good and evil is there. How many of you participated in the solar eclipse in one way? I had my little glasses. I was in Baltimore, so I didn't see much, but a bit. Remember that fascination that it was dark when it wasn't, quote, supposed to be, but that there was something kind of magic about that? Remember that idea of magic and coming together. So, mythology, the stories that we make up, and when I say make up, that we create, I don't mean to mean it at all, really begin to situate us in the cosmos, with ourselves, with each other. And yes, I am suggesting that mythology is the cultural structure for stories, but that schema that you learned about in Psych 101, or the way we organize cognition, is the individual's representation of mythology. And at the meso level, families have something that we call family mythology. Think of family mythology as the thing that if you brought somebody home and they didn't have one of those 2 or 3 things, that it would be a deal breaker. In my family, you have to be honest and you have to be smart. That's the family mythology. I suspect most of you in the room have at least one of those, the smart one. And families will reproduce stories, and the culture will reproduce stories, and they set themselves up in the schema. Schema and mythology are more ordered than experiential reality. Lots of things happen to you. They seem random. We tell stories about the way the world is supposed to be. It is more ordered. We can set up expectations. And the way schema work is, particularly in the Western world, is that we will impose a certain order in experiential reality. We will interpret things according to the schema and myth. We will remember them according to schema and myth. We will recall them. So one of the big things in Western culture is balance. That we expect things to be dichotomous. We can separate them into up, down, good, bad, black, white, because black and white are the polar opposites. And so they serve a purpose as the polar opposite, and they create balance. If I told you, and this is a real study, if I tell you that John loves Mary and they are happy, 3 weeks later, and yes, I did impose heteronormativity in there but that's another talk about why heteronormativity and balance are connected in our attitude set. 3 weeks later, adults will remember that Mary loves John. Nobody said that. Maybe they're happy because of other reasons. Notice, I'm suggesting that adults particularly are very good at, that's what inference is, filling in the spots based on what is supposed to happen. So mythology and schema set up what we expect to see, and then we see it, we encode it, we remember it. And adults are perfectly capable of taking fictional material and filling in the spaces too. So if you don't know many black people, we're perfectly willing of taking the fictional ones and saying that's how they are. If you ever wondered why people thought that electing a black president cured everything, they inferred a lot, that filled in all the spaces despite what was going on in experiential reality. So dichotomy creates opposites. It creates categories. One of the things that we do, particularly in the Western world, is that we create categories. And I'm doing a little Psych 101 in case everybody hasn't had it, but the way schema works and the way it sets up perception, this is the last story about my daughter. She kind of grew up here on campus, and there was a secretary who had an old IBM Selectric computer that she used to type envelopes for a long time. And Kelsey was about 2.5, 3. She'd never seen a typewriter. I suspect many of you haven't seen any of them. And she walked around it for a few minutes, and we were just watching her, and she stepped back and she said, "Computer." She didn't have a schema for typewriter, so she shoved it in to the category we had. Notice what I'm saying? That people will, it's a lot of work to create a new category for something that you may never see again. So the older you get, the much more likely you are to shove it into a category that you already have. The stories you already know. Yes, I am saying that. We see what we expect to see. Now, I also will say that myth is highly resilient. And it shows, by starting with the ancient world, what I'm saying is that things set up over time. And our relationship with the light and darkness in Western culture is different from this. Ancient cultures believed that there was always a little something in the other. When we have dichotomies, our dichotomies are often discrete. The white is over there and black is over there. Clearly, this is not saying this. This is the yin and the yang. You'll recognize that there's a little bit of blackness in the white, a little bit of whiteness in the dark, and the link to atmospheric darkness is there. That I just pulled this off the web. Didn't make that at all. So, and I will suggest that myth serves purposes. And when I talk about the sacred dark feminine, which I'm not going to talk a lot about today, I argue that she explodes on the scene when the culture needs her. Usually when women and minorities are getting uppity and the economy is bad. So after the Reconstruction, during Depression, and the 1980s. So Oprah, for instance, okay? So we have these two ideas of the dangerous black and what I'll call the protective black. Now, if you go back to the old creation stories, in the Greek, first there was chaos. The darkness is chaotic because she contains everything. And if, the Shaka Khan, Oprah Winfrey song, "I'm Every Woman is All in Me" is ringing in your head, yes, it's the same image. So without category, and that's problematic. Unchangeable and uncontrollable. Any preschool kid can tell you what happens when you add any color to black. You've all passed preschool, so what happens when you add any color to black? It's still black, right? Okay, so black is unchangeable and it can change itself and it can change other cultures. So, and yes, I'm suggesting over and over that people are watching the natural world and then creating larger conceptualizations based on it. Opaque, you can't see through it, no detail. Evil, most often associated with the male. We've just went through this where you have an affluent white male who has done a mass killing, and we have spent the last week and a half digging into that to try to see what his motive was, why he could have done that. Notice the next time you see a media image of a black man or an Arab man, they immediately go to no detail. We know why they did it. We don't have to worry about why they did it. There's none of that psychological analysis that goes on. And so that idea of blackness that has no detail, that is chaotic and highly problematic and dangerous if not contained by uniform, a cage, is problematic. I'm going to give you a couple examples. Othello. This is Othello killing Desdemona. In Western culture at the time, there was no other way for this story to end. By the time by the time Shakespeare writes Othello, there was a proverb that said, black is a pearl in a woman's eye. It's negative both the female and the blackness. That the white woman is so silly that she doesn't recognize danger, and that having a liaison with a black man, much less marrying him, will lead to the same end. The OJ story has that same kind of trajectory, regardless of how you feel. I'm not trying to get into that. So this is the English school, late 18th century, early 19th century, after he has killed her. At the same time, Shakespeare had a contemporary of Ben Jonson, who Queen Anne of Denmark, who was the wife of James I, commissioned a masque, kind of like a vanity play, where she and her ladies started out in blackface. They're playing the parts. It wasn't called blackface at the time, but they were in blackface. And at the end, they transformed. They are kept more virtuous by her blackness. The Queen of Sheba, the Bride of Solomon, who's the same figure, has that same idea that she was more virtuous because her darkness kept her virtuous. This is James Earl Jones, who you know as Darth Vader, in Broadway, doing the same thing. The scene is that Desdemona has to die. Now notice here, there's another polar opposite. You have now the black masculine as opposed to the white feminine. And they are very much considered polar opposites. The black man is still considered the uber masculine in Western culture. And the white female, although we're not supposed to say it out loud, is still considered the uber female. Everybody, you're okay with me saying that? And so when those two meet, supposedly, disaster hits. And I'm jumping back and forth, but I have students white women who have dated black men in Prince George's County, and the police stop them and ask them if they're okay. They're on a date. But they have to explain why they're okay. Right. There is the protective black. Protective because she conceals. She is miraculous. She is magic. She is transformational but catalytic. She changes, but she is unchanged, and most commonly associated with the female. So she is the black goddess who can transform. The founder of Alcoholics Anonymous wrote to Carl Jung and thanked him, because Alcoholics Anonymous and all of those 12-step programs are really watered down Jungianism. And he said, thank you, because I based this 12-step program on that. Now, in Jungianism, in 12-step programs, you know that the person has to hit bottom. That's part of the formula. Well, in Jungianism, they're not down there by themselves. The sacred dark feminine, who knows the terrible, is there to push them back up. And now that I've said that, you'll see this image all through movies, that if you can't figure out how the protagonist is going to get out of the situation, there's a fair chance that a black woman's going to show up and tell them the answer and then go on. She's often that lieutenant in crime shows who stands there and says, I think they da-da-da-da-da. And they go, oh, and she never gets promoted. She is changing, but she doesn't change herself. She's catalytic, and she plays that role. And I argue that often that image gets very much co-opted. Show you some of the ways that this has happened. These are Italian Americans, 1905, on the east side of New York. Can you tell what they're parading with? Can you see it in the back? It's a black Madonna. Okay. I'll give you a better image. same time. That's the Black Madonna. The image is probably now in Hoboken. They moved it after a while, but they still have the feast day of the Black Madonna. She was particularly revered by nuns. The priests weren't particularly useful. The Jesuits, often if you go into a Jesuit cathedral, there'll be what's called an alabaster Madonna in the center. If you go to the side or sometimes to the basement, there's a Black Madonna because the founder of the Jesuits laid down his, anybody here from Spain? Laid down his arms in front of the Black Madonna in Spain. They're all over Eastern Europe. There are a lot of them in France and England and South America. There are lots of Madonnas. Now, how is the Black Madonna different from the White Madonna? Go back to what I said. She's miraculous, she's magic, but she's willing to go to the mat for you. So you pray to the Black Madonna when you want somebody dead. I'm not kidding. There actually when you really need a miracle and you need somebody who understands the terrible, you pray to the Black Madonna. Now, that has some usefulness. This is Pope John Paul. The Polish Madonna is a Black Madonna. She also is the patron saint of revolutions. And he prayed to her because he was a freedom fighter. And he considered that the Black Madonna delivered Poland. So we consider Mary, the Alabaster Mary, to be the milder, and the darker Mary, who is a Madonna and revered by the late Pope, as particularly miraculous. You begin to see what's being set up here, is that it's very much, in some ways, the same characteristics of Blackness. I was talking to a student one day as I was beginning to work on this, and he grew up in Annapolis, not particularly political, not overtly racist in any way. And I said, so what do you remember being told about Black men? And he said, never to find myself in an alley with one. That's a dangerous dark man, because he's going to do something to you. And it took him a while to pull this up. It didn't come off the top of his tongue, because he didn't grow up with these overt messages. And I said, well, what about Black women? And he looked at me, because this became a dangerous question. And he said, according to the mythology at least, and he said, never make a Black woman angry. And I said, is that the same image? And he thought for a while, and he said, no, because you're on our side. So that angry Black woman is often co-opted and working for other people. Now, one of the other things that mythology does is, I remember I said balance, and sometimes it will fill in things that seem to be missing. This is last Saturday Night Live. This is Gal Gadot on your right, who is who?
Wonder Woman.
Wonder Woman, right? So she's hosting Saturday Night Live, and on her side is Leslie Jones, who's a staple on Saturday Night Live. Somebody read that body posture to me. Who's Wonder Woman in that picture? Now, why does that, and the audience really went wild, and social media went wild, and according to social media, that's the way it should be. It seemed more fitting for Leslie Jones, who is actually, can't quite see it. Yeah, you can't see it from your perspective. Is taller, and she's not menacing, but she just walks out, and she's standing there in the costume, and she's perfectly fine. But she should be the Amazon, and she should be the person who's protecting. And often that female protective black feminine is in protection of the white woman. Anybody read? Oh, you didn't meant to read in comic books, did you? Okay. I have a former student who's actually now the foremost critic of comic books in the country, who graduated from Maryland because he said, you can make a living this way? And I said, yeah, you can. So you don't know who this is. You know who this is on your left, but on the right is Amanda Waller. Amanda Waller is the first mortal to run a gang of superheroes. And he is the Black Knight. Now, the Black Knight is kind of interesting because in Arthurian legends, it could be Arthur in disguise, so you had to be careful about that. But Batman had to be rehabilitated a little bit before he could go into the movies, so they sent him to Amanda Waller, who keeps psychotic superheroes in line just with her brilliance and her mouth. So that very much is that protective darkness, and this is the cover of my book. So, what I'm suggesting, though, is that we are perfectly capable of transferring all of that idea, all of those stories about the atmospheric darkness and mythology to real people. This is by Charles Carroll. I don't know if you can see this well enough, but it's important I point it out. The Negro Beast, or in the image of God. Can you see the or? Which one do you think he fell down on? He comes down on it being a beast, and the idea of the negative masculine and what's perceived to have been a scientific piece is that black men were not very highly evolved. This becomes the black brute. This is, how am I doing? Okay. This is a World War I propaganda poster. It's not unusual for stereotypes to blur from one group to stand in for another. So I don't know if you can see it on the club. It says culture in German, and then you see the headpiece. So here, this is really supposed to be about destroy the German group, but rather if they had put a white-looking person, and here, I mean, that blurring of humanoid figures and a gorilla is on purpose. Is that you're supposed to save the white woman, and this actually, there's one that, I showed you the first one because it's easier to see, but this one actually has a little more context. At the bottom it says, if you want to fight for your country and freedom, enlist today at the Army Recruiting Station at Tremont Row in Boston, Massachusetts. If this, on the side, if this war is not fought to a finish in Europe, you know how the United States manages to fight its wars everywhere else? It will be on the soil of the United States. So here you have this image of the half-naked white woman, vulnerable, vanquished, and the ape-like man who is coming ashore with his club. You probably at this moment are thinking, well, maybe she's overreaching, right? This is LeBron and Giselle, and so you can see them together. Now, as far as we can tell, LeBron is a perfectly friendly guy, right? You know, except when he's making political statements recently. And Giselle doesn't look vanquished. She looks like she's in on it, but the club has been replaced by football. The facial expression is pretty much the same. Why is that an attractive poster for Vogue, though? We have to ask ourselves that. You know, so that idea of extreme ends coming together is attractive. And so they make use in a superfluous way. You know, the cover is about the dress. He doesn't need to be the fierce black man, but nobody has to explain that. And that's the way culture works. That's the way mythology works. Nobody has to explain it. And OJ is in the news again. This is the cover of Newsweek and Time at the time. And Time darkened the cover to make him look more sinister. And those of you who are not gamers, this is Grand Theft Auto, so which is an example of another of the black group. This is an extremely popular game, one of the most popular games. Now, how does this relate to what we are talking about in terms of cognitive perception? This is a quote from Officer Darren Wilson, who shot Michael Brown. They're roughly the same size people. And when I grabbed him, the only way I could describe it is I felt like a 5-year-old holding on to Hulk Hogan. He perceived Michael Brown to be bigger. And that often shows up in police reports, that they perceive the black man to be way bigger than they turn out to be. And I'm suggesting that they're not lying. I'm suggesting that that's exactly what they perceive, because everything has taught them to see black men, the negative masculine blackness, as dangerous, as hulking, as someone who's likely to come at them. And so we get a lot of panicking pieces. Now, I said that, and I need to point out that every culture has a boogeyman. The black man is the boogeyman of Western culture. The thing that parents warn their children about, that they fear. Fear in the brain is very much like pain. It's a warning signal that something is dangerous and something that you need to move away from. We now know that. And now that we can slice into the brain or use electrodes, we know that when we show pictures of the black face, the promo that you had for this had a black face, when subjects see that, the amygdala lights up. Now that has been interpreted as negative, but the amygdala also has what we consider positive emotions. And so there are many more questions. As I said at the beginning, this is a very interesting moment to be asking these questions, because now we can kind of look into what the brain is doing. And I'm going to do a plug for a Brain and Behavior Initiative on campus, because they actually, on this campus, are starting an initiative around race and neuroscience. And I'm looking at Jens, who is one of the leaders of Brain and Behavior Initiative, and he has taught me that neuroscience is exactly split down the middle as a field as to whether race matters. Because from a scientific standpoint, we all have the same brain, or at least start out with the same brain. And the other half are saying, but the brain is plastic, it moves, we learn, so of course it means something. And the field is split down the middle, and the data is ambiguous at best. And so on this campus, we'll probably start, I say we because I'm not a neuroscientist, but they let me be on the steering committee, that we're going to end up with asking some of the best questions. And if you want to keep up with that, then you should. So I think I'm going to stop there. There's more than I can say, but I'm about out of time. And so we set this up as a question-answer for now, but there are other experts in the room, so what I hope this will become is a discussion. And everybody is an expert because everybody is somewhere on that gradient from light to dark. Many of you have experienced filling in. So blackness is unchangeable. So blackness stays at the end of the continuum and whiteness stays over there. Other immigrant groups fill in as they come into the country. Some start out black. The Irish, the Italians started out black, and then they became white. Other groups who are lighter brown fill in, and actually there's studies that whites are more comfortable. If they're in the room with blacks, they're more comfortable. If some lighter skinned brown people are in there too, kind of fill in the gaps. So everybody has had some experience one way or another with this. But it's important that you understand that I am not saying, and therefore we are hardwired to be racist. I'm not saying that at all. What I've tried to do is to pull up something that people may be responding to unconsciously, because that's how myth and culture work. You don't question it, and question it. I worked with a graduate student. I was his advisee, who did a dissertation that was half humanities and half psychology, and he interviewed progressive, self-described progressive white people. And at first, there was you do this in psychology, they didn't quite know what the topic was, but he was recording them, and they knew they were recording them. And then he called them back and played them back the racist statements that they had made. And at first they said, I didn't say that. He said, listen again, are you suggesting that I altered it? It was their voice. And they became very angry at him for pulling this out and showing them that was the dissertation, that he was showing them their implicit bias, which is hard to do. So you know about this, and there are people who know about this from a scholarly perspective. So react, because I hope I said some things that are provocative. Although some people are going, yeah, I knew this, and some people got angry, and some people learned. What is your response to what I've said? Students are doing this. Yes.
How does this fit in with how does what you've laid out here relate to people who have either very low vision or no vision?
Well, you know, it's very interesting. There's a study that I shouldn't say fond of, that's the wrong word, where they used blind people and they had them listen to a football game. It was a regular football game. They didn't alter it, just that the blind people couldn't see it. And they asked them to identify race, over 90% accuracy. They were listening to how they were described. And if they were described as powerful and big and strong, they were black, and they were almost always right. If they were perceived as smart and strategic, they were almost always not black. So yes, while I've said this is based on vision, because we then build stories and descriptions and expectations around it, other people participate in it. Yes. Were you about to say something? She thought you were about to say something. Oh, okay.
I'd be happy to. But
Oh, okay. She wants to say something. You're letting the older people carry you. That will not last.
That's why I wasn't going to say anything. I was curious, you mentioned around fear, I think it was the amygdala lights up, and then you were saying there's something positive in there, and I was wondering if it's the protective aspect of fear.
Well, but I mean, you can have positive emotions. The amygdala is also connected to empathy, right?
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and you think about empathy, and I mean, that's a whole other talk too, and there are people who are doing work on empathy. It's a kind of a two-step kind of, I mean, something, you usually think about empathy as being connected to something that's negative, and then you associate yourselves with them, so it's kind of a two-step. But empathy, I mean, we are alive as a species because of empathy. So positive and negative get very murky when you start talking about human behavior. You can see how it would be easy if you're not at the top of the food chain and something big is chasing you and trying to eat you. Good is staying alive. But once you're not worried about that anymore, then what is good and what is bad gets very murky. Would it have been good to kill Hitler early? There are lots of people who would say yes, and yet there are people who would say that killing anybody is immoral. So you see what I mean? That's an extreme example, obviously, but an example. Yes. So now this side of the room is skating. Okay.
So I noticed that like a lot of the things that you mentioned surrounded the Western world and like the schema associated with light and dark in the Western society. So I was wondering like how is the schema set up relating to light, dark, white, black, those dichotomies out somewhere other than the Western world?
Well, okay, those dichotomies, the Western world is more will arrange its information more dichotomously than many other cultures, and so there's much more of what we would consider gray area and older societies, because most of human behavior is really in that space. So one, there's not that easy dichotomy, but all theories, all cultures have color theories, which is what I was leaning on, and the video began to talk about that. That's why I showed you, just to kind of dislodge you from your assumption. For Asian and African societies, the color of death, which is what we consider black to be, and I'm being really broad, and you're allowing me to do that. The color of death is white. So it's not necessarily, that's what my point, it's not natural, but yet we have built this meaning structure so elaborately that we might get, as an African American, we might get past race. I'm not so sure that we can get past color, although we're going to try. And I just realized I forgot to show the ending, but the video, but we'll get to that in a minute because you just reminded me. Yeah.
I'm interested more in like the neuroscience and race part of it. So is there evidence that maybe darkness is more like innate, like natural, because like you mentioned how darkness is also like protective, and you know, when children like grow and develop, they develop in like a dark womb, so maybe like
What do you mean natural? Tell me what you mean.
like
Although that's a difficult word when you're talking about neuroscience, but go ahead. Tell me what you mean.
like in terms of like, is the way that we perceive darkness and lightness, is it something that's more innate rather than something that you develop environmentally?
That's hard to say because human beings don't sit still. It's easier if we talk about day and night. Yes, we do have a relationship with day and night, but with obviously our relationship to light changed dramatically with the advent of the light bulb. So that our day part, where we do daylight things, is much longer. And we don't sleep as much, and that changes all kinds of behavior. If we were to go back to lack of light, we can't imagine that. I mean, lots of people in Puerto Rico can imagine that right now. Then yes, we tend to fall asleep in the dark. And long periods of darkness lead to hibernation. So there's a baseline. I'm more comfortable with the term baseline than innate and natural. You want to add to that? Yes.
Well, there's a big metaphor related to darkness that I sort of thought you were going to touch on, and you haven't mentioned it, but it has to do with the way.
Say what you said again, sir.
There's a big metaphor relating to darkness that you, I think, haven't touched on yet, which is that when when there's light, we can see things, and when we see things, we get knowledge of them. And so one way we think about thinking and understanding things is in terms of the way we see things, right? So I see what you mean expresses understanding. Throwing light on a subject makes it easier to understand. If something is clear, it's easy to understand. If something is murky or impenetrable or dark or obscure, it's hard to understand. And it's a very rich metaphor, and it's exactly the kind of thing that you're talking about. It's a schema that we use in order to think about understanding. And it's also, I think, a universal and human experience. Not for blind people, right? They don't actually get any understanding by seeing things. But the light helping you to see things, lots of different languages and cultures use this mapping, this metaphor.
And it's important that you're using the verb to see as eyes, and you're using to see as analogous to understand, and that's where you and I would differ.
Well, no, I'm claiming that there's a sort of a structure, so the frame that we have for thinking about understanding gets it.
Oh, very much so.
Right. That's
very much so. But I would argue that that's more Western than not, because in Western cultures, and one of the reasons we use PowerPoint is that you will remember something if I reinforce it with vision. If anybody is recently arrived from Africa, they actually remember what they hear as well as what they see. And the understanding, remember that because this is very much tied, and I didn't go into this idea of the light is very much tied to willful rationality. And other cultures that, Toni Morrison did not, and Latino writers did not create what we call magical realism. There are many other cultures where you're existing on many spheres of consciousness all at once. And so, for instance, the Native Americans, the last stage of the sweat lodge is complete darkness, because that's when the understanding occurs. But yes, we do fuse see and to understand, but it's not something that is universal. But yeah, I mean, okay.
What I am claiming is that there's an experience, right? There's certain types of, there's certain experience of understanding something that happen by virtue of seeing something, right? So if somebody shows you a diagram, and you say, oh, I see what you mean, you're both reporting a visual experience and reporting some sort of mental clicking into space.
But
and that's all I'm claiming is that kind of sort of experience of an intellectual epiphany via a visual epiphany is sort of programmed into the way our bodies work when we have vision. And that different cultures, to the degree that they want to, or to the degree that they do, I mean, yes, there's cultural variation, and there's also other ways of understanding within English, right? So we can think of it as grasping, or hearing, or sensing, or feeling, and those things get elaborated across cultures too. But it seems to be a more powerful metaphor, and it can, of course, feed into ideas about evaluations of darkness.
Well,
it doesn't have to, but it can.
and I agree with you that that is the Western perception. I think there's a lot of evidence that's beginning. I mean, for instance, the work on body memory and cognition that may occur in other places. Our eyes are very close to our brains. That troubles that in some ways. And so that idea that we may be perceiving in different ways, and that lends us to understanding, it becomes,
All I want to say is the same metaphor is found in many unrelated languages.
Oh, I agree.
That's all I'm saying.
But I agree, but the primacy of...
It's like saying that it's a Western thing and not something else seems to be missed the...
But notice, what you just did was to impose a dichotomy. The fact that I said it was Western was not to say that it didn't exist anywhere else. That's a dichotomy.
Well, I agree. I interpreted dichotomies.
Is that a hand? He fidgeted. Yes.
It's more like a comment, but like you can disagree, or I'm not really sure of it yet. I just have experienced it. So I grew up in Africa, and I've noticed this kind of Nigeria.
Okay.
So I've noticed this kind of like, not like the white and black thing, but more like the lighter you are, the more people appreciate you or think you're calmer, or I guess in a feminine, not like feminine, but even for like guys, I think they're softer if they're like light-skinned. Like, oh, they're not as tough as the dark-skinned guys, or they're not as attractive. So I feel like, would you say that some Western perception of black and white can kind of like influences other cultures in a different way?
Influences other cultures in other places, you mean?
Yes.
Oh yeah, the biggest export of the United States is culture. I mean, we don't export widgets so much, we export ideas in the form, in lots of forms, in literature and popular culture and science. And our perception very much bleeds into other cultures. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there other questions?
Then I want to leave about 2 minutes to show.
Can we just take one? Was there a hand? Okay, one more question.
Do we have an idea? We have an idea of how far back in time our species has been creating this sort of schema for us.
Well, it's interesting because the Mesopotamian was 25,000, 30,000 BC. Cave paintings predate language, and they're using light and dark there. So as early as we see behavior that we can discern as trying to convey meaning, you have it. That relationship with the lightness and darkness is very much there. Not so much the one's better than the other, but that is there. It's very much there. So we were beginning to talk about inversion and whether or not it can happen. And the word black has gone to some degree as an inversion, so our grandparents would have never called themselves black. And you can date, and you can argue whether it has been successful or not. It's certainly been successful at some level with people with brown bodies saying, okay, if you're going to call me black, I'm going to embrace that. And the moment when that happens in the popular culture is 1968, right after Martin Luther King died. And James Brown sings, "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm White," yeah, you're going to see it. And right after that, 2 years later, Lorraine Hansberry has a play, and Nina Simone takes us a song that has even more meaning maybe for some of the people in the room, which is Young, Gifted, and Black. And it's hard now to hear those as revolutionary terms, black and anything positive, especially when tied to race. But that was the case. And you can pick this up with, there's a little bit of commentary in Interspice between James Brown.
James Brown's "I'm Black and I'm Proud" was an affirmation of self-respect. And it was a challenge to others to respect themselves and to respect him.
Brother, we get with it until we get our share. Say it now. Say it now. One more time. Say it now.
Everybody was trying to think of what to say about Martin Luther King getting shot, about the situation in America, the civil rights movement. Everybody just wanted to know how to capsulize it. And so when James Brown said, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud, that's it. That's it. So when he said it, everybody hollered back, I'm black and I'm proud.
The words were magical. I mean, that was the ultimate emancipation.
Every crisis is an opportunity, and he's one of the few people that took the crisis of 1968 and turned it into an opportunity to really help a generation of people.
So I just wanted you to hear how just the word, I'm black and I'm proud, as a lyric goes, there's not a lot there, but that it was perceived as revolutionary, and to hear that just being able to say those words was emancipatory is really important. So I think, particularly those of you who are taking Dr. Moody's class will be building on this for a long time, but I hope at least you've gotten some understanding. And it's okay if you don't agree, but understand that this relationship to the atmospheric darkness tells us something about our human condition.
Thank you for coming. We have some cookies in the back if you'd like to partake. And of course, Dr. Parks will be around to answer other questions. It's really nice to have you here today. Thank you.